Please show your hands. Wonderful. Who wants your church to be No Life Baptist Church? Can I have a show of hands? No. Today in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, it talks about what it means to have no life. So I hope that by the end of it, we will move from no life to New Life Baptist Church. Because the author is going to talk about the pursuit of pleasure, and he's going to ask, what's the point of it? What is the point of it? Is there an end to it? Is there a reason to it? So far, the author has been comparing, at first in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, comparing about things like, the pursuit of wisdom compared with being overly smart. So a recap of Ecclesiastes chapter 1. In the first chapter, our pastor talked about the pursuit of wisdom versus being overly smart, the unchanging principles of life, and the changing slides that is needed. Thank you. The unchanging principles of life versus the changing tastes of men. And so what is happening is that the author is saying, look, there are things happening. I want to know about wisdom, and I want to know what difference does it make in life versus just being overly smart. I want to know about the unchanging principles of life versus all these things that I'm seeing in life that is changing, that I'm trying to grasp. That's why he says it is vanity. The idea of vanity doesn't necessarily mean meaningless, but rather it can be things that, actions that are in vain, things that but you cannot seem to grasp. And so the author is saying, look, I've explored wisdom. Now, let's look at other things to see whether this thing of being vanity in life is true. And so he looked at mankind's changing tastes, and he said, okay, let's look through all the changing tastes of mankind. Let's look through all the pleasures in life and see whether there's meaning in it. And you know what? There is so many unchanging things, so many changing things in our life, isn't it not? That we have no control over. Wars, inflation, global warming, natural disasters. Things are constantly changing. And so the author will want to take wisdom, look at the pleasures in life, and he says, I want to put this to the test. Prove to me that the pleasures in life isn't the end goal that I'm trying to go after. And that's why we come to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1. When the author says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, you being wisdom. Enjoy yourself, or being us, for that matter. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this was also vanity. So what the author is trying to say, he said, I'm going to pursue pleasure and find out whether there's meaning in life. It's going to dive to the deep end of pleasure for our sake. It's an experiment, a life experiment, which, by the way, interestingly, if you read the wisdom books, the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, do you apply everything that you see in the Word of God? Well, yes and no. Okay? Yes, the Word of God is true, should be applied in our life. But in book of Ecclesiastes, it's also a book of observation about life. So it doesn't mean that the author says, come, make merry and sleep with all the different women, then you go ahead and do so. He is telling us about the observation about the reality of life. That's why I love to preach the book of Ecclesiastes, because it speaks for itself. I don't have to unfold the scripture, but I want to take us on a journey to engage scripture to look at real life. So now he has, in our minds, you picture this author, most probably Solomon, and with someone who grew up with everything that he needed and now turning to all the various pleasures in the world to experience what is out there. And I've heard second-generation Christians tell me this. Those who grew up in the church and the Lord has blessed them richly with good parents, godly parents, things that they have, and then they tell me, I want to go out there and explore the rest of the world. There's so many things I've never experienced before. I see some of you grinning because it's almost as if you have gone through the same thing as well. And it's true, isn't it? They want to go through the extreme. Why? Because they want to find out about life itself. So that's what the author is saying. And in chapter 1, verse 13 to 14, he says, and it's not in the slides, I'm going to read it up to you, and it says, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under the sun. And he goes on and say, it is an unhappy business that God has given the children of men to be busy with, which means God has allowed the children of men to go through the toils and the things on earth. And then he goes on to 14 and says, I've seen everything under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. And so the author is saying, look, I have wisdom, I have everything under the sun, I have everything here, but I need to find out more about this unhappy business. Why am I still unhappy? Why am I still unsatisfied? And he's saying that, look, I want to come to the point that he says, look, at this point, when I look at wisdom, wisdom has given me, and wisdom has removed all the illusions that I have about life. So you're feeling a bit miserable. It's like, oh, if I'm ignorant, then I know all this. But now that I'm wise, because God has given me wisdom, I look at all these things, I realize, man, this is unhappy business. I'm no longer ignorant. Now I had to grapple with the reality of life. Now I had to grapple whether there is a pointlessness in human activity. And so he turns to pleasure. Testing to discover if somehow pleasure will bring him, in the later part of the verse you should read, he says gain or profit or reward. Which means, does life has a reward? Is there a point to it? The idea of the word pleasure is actually not a helpful one. Okay, the minute I think pleasure, you think of all the vices, right? The word pleasure actually has dual meaning. One, yes, it can mean the pleasure that we intend it to be, but it also can mean joy. So I do wonder whether the author purposely chose this word so that we can know the double-sidedness of it. Whether pleasure as in pleasures of this world, or joy that is lasting and unchangeable. Which is which, the author is saying. Let us find out, he says. So he went in pursuit of it. So right at the start, we find out that what the author is trying to say is that mankind pursued pleasure through earthbound means in hope of gaining, not joy, in hope of gaining more pleasure in earthbound mediums. So that's why he's trying to say, is there a means, is all these earthbound methods going to bring me earthbound pleasure that is going to be lasting? Is it even possible? And right at the start, he says, I said of laughter in verse 2, I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? So even as his sermon started, he has ended his sermon. He's asking a rhetorical question. What use is it? Very depressing. Sounds like this guy is in midlife crisis. Somebody asked me, why am I keeping my mustache? Then I keep telling the person, midlife crisis. I search with all my heart, to cheer my body with wine. My heart is still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly till I might see what was good for the children of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Verse 4, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made for myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, not porcupines, the delights of the Son of Man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. And also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desire, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So the author is saying, after all this, he's saying, what's the use? What use is the pursuit of pleasure? And he lists out the following things in pleasure: happiness, drinking, works, possessions, wealth, sex or companionship, and greatness. All the possessions that he have, the pleasures that he seeks after. It sounds almost as if he is living in a first world problem. What does first world problem includes? Going on holiday and have no Wi-Fi. First world problem. It's the same for him, having all this and finding it vanity. What is the use? The story about a man at the airport who met an acquaintance, and he looked, and his acquaintance looked troubled. And he says, "What's the matter?" To which the man sighed and said, "I thought I was finally going to have a weekend to myself, but now I had to go to supervise my repairs on my house in Florida." Dejected, he said, waiting to take off in his private jet. First world problem. But one can be rich in possession and pleasure and still have problems in life. I mean, take a look at all the famous actors and actresses in life. They may be rich, famous, beautiful, in good figure. By the way, round is also a figure. In good figure, but they are still miserable. Some of them. They still go through, for some, divorce. They still go through pains in life where the children don't obey them. They still go through quarrels with their wife, issues or quarrels with their spouses, issues in life. They still go through illnesses, no matter what possessions they have. What if I have it all, Solomon asked. Would it bring significance in life? He started off by saying, why laughter, he says. He started off by saying, laughter, it is mad. So what is he saying? Laughing isn't bad, okay, in its own. But the context here is that laughing is, that person is utterly and totally out of grasp with reality. So he's saying that, look, we don't want to be totally and out of grasp with reality. We want to, with wisdom, which is what he's saying, I'm doing all this through wisdom to find out more about life. And so he wants to pursue, and so the first thing he pursued is what? Happiness. There's two things. Happiness through drinking. So happiness is also one of the things that he wants. Oh, laughter, make merry. In other words, be among people that it just makes him happy. It's almost quite sad, because have you ever met people who in a crowd, they seem happy, they walk away, and the next thing they tell you they are depressed? Have you looked at all these Korean actors and actresses who have taken their own life? On the surface, they look like they have everything and they're happy, but they have taken their own life. Have you met people who can be in a crowd and still feel empty? That is exactly the type of laughter, the happiness, the merrymaking that he wanted. The cheer with my body with wine. That means the word cheer does make the idea that he wants to search for happiness. But to cheer my body with wine means that he is using wine to lead himself. That's what it means. To lead himself to find happiness. And so he goes through drinking. And that's something that we find in our modern day. We're seeing the drinking culture in our age. If you're unhappy, you drink, right? If you are upset, you drink, right? And you got people that want to drink and get drunk because the high of getting drunk seems to for momentarily make them forget the misery or the struggles that they face on earth. So drinking to the point of drunkenness. By the way, the author is not against drinking wine. Okay, when Paul says it's good, just a bit of it. The issue of drinking here, the word here, literally does give you the idea of how it to the point that you are drunk. So the idea of trying to find the happiness, the purpose, the pleasure in life by drinking, and then finding pleasure in drinking as well. And so that's the problem that he was highlighting. They will crash, and then when the illusion of the drinking goes off, the high goes off, reality comes back again. And then the author says that he made great works. Wow, he built so many things, all kinds of things that he built. His projects, his works. It isn't just ordinary projects and works, by the way. If you read into the context of King Solomon, you realize that he was set out to transform his environment. Not only just transform his environment so that it can be grand, it's to transform his environment to facilitate his enjoyment of life. To facilitate the rest of the vices that he's going after. Can you believe it? That's the intent and intensity to go all out for pleasure. Now, you may not have buildings, projects, what have not in homes. But you may go after something so as to enjoy a vice in life. You may look at your work and say, my work is so that I can continue to use this to do the vices in life. That's what he's doing. The intensity, the intentionality behind it. So sinning against God isn't something that, it's just blinded, I just fell into it. Nobody's fell into it. There's a deliberate intensity and intentionality to set ourselves up so that we can sin. That's crazy. That's the madness and laughter he's talking about. But there's more to it. He has built the house, the vineyard, the gardens and parks, all mentioned. All these words actually are derived from a Persian word. It's called an enclosure. Right? The Persian word, an enclosure, it literally derives from it, we derive our modern word called paradise. Because it's paridesa. Paridesa is a Persian word. It derives where we derive our word paradise. So he's trying to create a paradise. Planted all sort of fruit trees. Wonder if durian tree is one of them. Then he populated the paradise with people. Male, women, male and female slaves, children that are born to them. And he had many servants, probably to take care of all his needs that he had. Like some crazy rich Asian. And then maybe he have even those that will help him do his manicure, his hairdressing, and probably someone who brush his teeth, he wakes up, peel his grapes, and all he do is just to open his mouth and just eat them. He probably have everything taken care of for him. And he has slaves to indulge in all kinds of pleasure, not only just the pleasures in terms of serving him, but the pleasure of even sexual relationship. That's what it means. Verse 7, he says, I bought male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions and herds and flocks, and more than anyone who has been before me in Jerusalem. And then he says, I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, many concubines, the delight of sons of men. So he takes pleasure in his possessions. He takes pleasure in his wealth. Enormous wealth of the king. Unparalleled numbers of herds, flocks, and hoards of treasure that have been imparted from all the kings and provinces. Whether is it plundered, whether is it a tribute, either or. What's our modern day equivalent? The pursuit of material goods. The desire for, say, the latest gadgets, luxury items, trendy fashion. Now, the whole idea isn't wrong to have all this. Okay, I have gadgets too. The whole idea is that it consumes. This pleasure comes to the point it consumes your life almost as if it's the only thing in life that gives you pleasure. Can you get what I mean? So it's nothing wrong to have the latest iPhone. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is if you think the iPhone and your next model of iPhone and the next model of iPhone is the only pleasure, the only thing that will bring you purpose in life. So the whole idea is that, acquire more and more, which is why he's saying the great possessions of herds. He's just saying, I'm acquiring more and more and more, thinking that you will build for me happiness and fulfillment. Only to find it temporal. Vanity, a grasp after the wind. I once heard a story about a man who had a massive collection of shoes. Men are not women, so women it's okay. So this man has a massive collection of shoes. He has shoes for every occasion, running shoes, hiking shoes, dress shoes, even shoes for painting. His closet was overflowed with footwear. So one day, someone asked him, how many feet do you have? The man paused, looked down at his 2 feet and replied, well, just 2. Sometimes we accumulate possessions far beyond the actual needs. And certainly this was the case with Ecclesiastes. He gathered himself silver, gold, all the wealth. Modern day context of wealth would be us finding financial prosperity desirable, deceiving us into thinking that it guarantees happiness and security. Guarantees comfort. But we've seen the richest people who are miserable. I've seen the poorest people who are so rich in their lives, especially when we are in Philippines. One of the things about going to the Philippines for our mission trip is that when we meet believers in the Philippines who are living who used to be people who live in the Smoky Mountains. And these brothers and sisters in Christ, they taught me such a valuable lesson. The first time I'm there, I met them. They had such a joy that is so unfathomable. When I look at them and I'm thinking, here is them with very little, but they have much. Here is me with much, but sometimes very little. And so there's something to be learned here, that it is not just the silver and gold and treasures, not just the financial prosperity. Someone once said to me that people who don't have happiness in life, they say, money cannot buy happiness, is because they don't have money. That is until that person falls ill, have relationship issues that money cannot solve. Then you realize, nope, money is desirable, yes, but it's not going to be your purpose in life. It's not going to be a lasting joy, lasting peace of mind. So the king also had unspecified numbers of human beings devoted to the task of pleasing him. And the word delight here that you read in the Bible, the word delight literally means something or someone that is delightful, tender, delicate, soft, and particularly to a woman. That's the meaning of the word delight here. So there is no doubt there is a sexual element involved when he's talking about the delight of men and women. So our culture nowadays promotes the idea that pleasure such as sex and even things like pornography, for example, should be the primary goals in life. We don't say it, but the way we engage it reveals a lot about who we are. In fact, everything that I have mentioned here, or rather everything that the wise man has mentioned here, if we take a good hard look at ourselves, we realize we think of such things from time to time. So people seek constant stimulation. I mean, the goodness, when you read the newspaper, the parties, the experiences, even media, social media, there is such a gravitation towards things like sex. And it attacks our senses. You cannot watch a series on Netflix sometimes without it having the sexual element to it. It's scary how subtle and obvious they have put it in. But yet, the pursuit of momentary pleasure often leads to a sense of emptiness, dissatisfaction. I have a friend of mine who we never thought that he will get married because he always been changing girlfriends after girlfriends after girlfriends. And he's sleeping around with different girls. And one day, he got married, and another friend of mine commented to him, my condolences. Then he jokingly said, oh no, so sorry, it's my congratulations. And then he asked my friend, well, why do you decide to get married? Then he said, because I became lonely. Now help me out here. This is a friend, and my wife would know this friend of ours. This is a friend who changes girlfriend every other week. Okay, like he changed his shirt. Okay. And he's happily hugging the girls, happily going out and showing off his girls to us from time to time. And sometimes he's even two-timing different girls at the same time, boasting about it. And here is one man, by the time he reached his 30s, tell us, I'm lonely. All the sex in the world cannot satisfy the emptiness and the loneliness that's within. In fact, it made him become aware even more of his loneliness. Then there's the last part, greatness. He says, so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Some find pleasure or purpose in life or joy in becoming great, surpassing all. But then there's a question for all of us here today. But none of us are like Solomon. Huh? So what's our modern day equivalent if we are not crazy rich Asians then? How about greatness in terms of our name? Social media. Social media platform has become a prevalent medium, right, for people to create and project an idealized image of their lives. And I mean, how many of you have watched the Netflix about those the fake errors of, the fake people who think that they are socialites, they manage to trick people into believing that they are socialites, and then they go around taking advantage of all these hotels and everything, and then they take photos, the way they take photos, must be glamour. Social media. We may not be crazy rich Asians, but the pursuit to be crazy rich, to be great, is there. In attitude, if not in deed. So some people spend significant time curating a perfect social media presence to seek what? Validation, greatness, approval, greatness in the number of followers and likes and comments. That's the greatness we crave. The irony is that behind every filtered and carefully selected images is a reality that the true joy and contentment sometimes is not found in the virtual world. So many people, in terms of career also, want to be great in their career. They want to create a name for themselves, accumulating titles, job titles, amassing wealth, telling people, oh, I know so-and-so, I know so-and-so, to show the greatness of it. They work long hours, sacrifice personal time and relationship, all for the pursuit of success, the greatness that we crave. And then finding that it's empty, repetitive, and sometimes, most of the time, restless, unfulfilled, insecure. Just in case we think we are any different from Solomon in his experience or his experiment, we are not. We are seated here with Christians that think that they are missing out. FOMO, fear of missing out. We have Christians that grew up in Christian family and think that, and look at their friends who are fooling around and say, maybe I'm missing out. We don't say it, but we think it. Sometimes you look at your friends and say, wow, they can do such things because they're not Christians. How I wish I can do the same. We don't say it, but sometimes we think of it. We are no different from Solomon if we check our hearts very carefully. The book of Ecclesiastes is as relevant to you and I today as it was when Solomon wrote it. Because the heart condition is the same. Solomon has tried everything that he desired and he thought he deserved from his work. He says, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Verse 10, I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. So what he means is this, he tried everything he desired, and because he had toil hard, means the word toil is very interesting, it also means work. And so he felt that, because I work hard, I found pleasure in all my toil. Since I enjoy all my toil, he thought that was his reward, that he deserved it. But he didn't stop there. He went on to verse 11 and says, then I considered all that my hands had done, the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, it was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Interesting. To use the word toil has double meaning, because the word toil does literally means work. So when he says, the reward of my toil means, all of you want to be rewarded, right? You want to be paid for your work, right? That's what he means. There is a reward for my hard work. But the irony is that the word toil also means what it really means. It is such a drag. It is such a hard work. Is there an end to it? Is there a meaning behind it? So this word has such a beautiful double meaning that he's using. And it was still, if all the hard work comes crashing down to become vanity. Wow. You know, the interesting thing about being addicted to pleasure is that you need more and more of it. So, the funny thing is this. We want pleasure to last on and toil to stop at some point. It's the other way around in reality. You will toil on and your pleasure won't last. Isn't it true? You will keep working. I got a friend who went on holiday and before, he loves going on holiday. And when COVID hit, he was so miserable, cannot go on holiday. Then when everything was, all the restrictions was lifted, he went on holiday, came back, then he was miserable. I asked him why. Because now holiday has ended. Must go back to work. So we think that we hope that pleasure lasts and then toil stops. But the reality, on the earth that we live in, it is the toil that keeps lasting until the day that you die. And the pleasure doesn't seem to last at all. So mankind pursued pleasure through earthbound means with the hope of gaining more pleasure in earthbound mediums, but found that these were wearisome. And so, but the author is not done exploring. Time does not permit me, but from verse 12 all the way to verse 16, he considered wisdom. And I'll read, even though time has caught up, but I think I'll still read the scriptures. And in verse 12 it says, so I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there's more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there's more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive the same event happens to them all. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me also. What happened to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies, just like the fool. So he's saying, what use is wisdom in the pursuit? Is there any more? You wish the word profit or gain in some of your translation. Is there any more in life? Is there anything better in life after all these toils? And then he says, and he goes back to Ecclesiastes 1:17, the last sermon that Pastor preached. He says in verse 17, I applied my heart to know wisdom, to know madness and folly. That's the two words again, madness and folly, wisdom, madness and folly. I perceive that this is but striving after the wind. So what he's saying is this, wisdom, I want to find out if all this pleasure that will end eventually, that does not last, viewed in the perspective of wisdom, will there be a change to it? And he says, no, there isn't. It's frustrating because he says that I can chase after all this, I can be wise, but you will not last. That's what it means. What can a man, in verse 12, what can the man do who comes after the king? He says, what more can my successor do than what I've already done? And then he goes on to say, but is there more in life? Is there gain? In the verse 13, the word gain can mean profit or something that is better. Is there something better in life? Yes, the only thing that's better is that wisdom is better than folly. That's what he said. But then after that, he took a step back through the eyes of wisdom and says, I've also been very wise, but like the fool, we will both die. Is there any gain in life? It's like me asking you guys, if you have children taking O-levels, right? How did your son or daughter do in your O-levels? All the subject fail. Right? So when I ask you, all the subject fail, then you're like, I don't want to go to church. Then I had to tell everybody that my son or daughter failed all the subject for O-levels. It matters to you today that you don't want to go to church because, you feel embarrassed. But let me tell you, whether you got all your subject F9 or all your subject A1, your son who get F9, your daughter who get F9, versus the son and daughter that get A1, they are both going to die eventually. That's what Solomon is saying. If I want to put, but that, by the way, that does not mean you don't study hard for your exams. That's not my point. Okay, you study, but you study with a sense of destiny and purpose. That's what today's sermon is about. Don't go to the rat race and get all your A1s for nothing. There's a purpose, there's a destiny for the pursuit of all this. But if you pursue it without a purpose and destiny, you are part of the rat race. You will question yourself at the end of the day when you hit midlife, like me. No, I'm just kidding. Right? Then grow mustache and then start asking yourself, what's the purpose in life? No, I'm not going through midlife crisis, okay? The author is saying, what's the point of surplus, profit? What's the point of better wisdom than the folly if we all end up dead? So in a sense, there's a saying, death makes fool of us all. There is nothing left after life has ended. There is no surplus. In other words, death levels everything, A1s or not. So if the toil to bring pleasure doesn't last, and life itself doesn't last, being wise and being foolish has no point. At the end of the day, you die, existential crisis, then what happens? This is why the author says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, the unhappy business of living, because it cannot solve death. Now, that's not depressing enough. In verse 17, he goes on. So I hated life because of what is done under the sun. It was grievance to me for all its vanity and striving after the wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And he continues to go on and he says, and who knows whether he will be wise or fool, yet he will be master of all which I toil and use under my wisdom under the sun. This is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is vanity and a great evil. So he says the unhappiness that God has given, the happiness in life that God has given, this is the same thing. He says this is a great evil in life. And in verse 22 he says, what has a man from all the toil and striving of the heart with which he toils under the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow and his work a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This is vanity. This is vanity. So what he's saying is that all the effort, all the toil is all for nothing. All for nothing. And so we now know why he used the word toil. Because the word toil does mean not just work, but really such a slog. Everything that I have is going to be passed on to somebody else, whether he's wise or not, whether what I have will last or not, because through him, don't know. But it doesn't belong to me anymore. And he says he can be even restless. Why? You ever met people who are rich who are restless as well? You can have all the things and then you feel that it's not enough, insecure about all the things. I don't know when you will lose it. Pastor Edmund Chan says, if money is the problem, the solution is very easy. Just give it all away. No money, no problem. But But that's the thing. With the money comes the restlessness. If money is all we find purpose in. And so he says, it is such a pointlessness, such despair, such hopelessness, such misfortune, vexation. In Proverbs says, what is the ultimate profit or gain in life's toil? There's nothing left over after life is ended. There's no surplus. Not only can wisdom not offer mortal beings the release from evil business of living, it also cannot solve the problem of death. And there ends the section by Solomon. May I invite the worship team to come forward and lead us in a depressing closing song? No, of course not. There is some hope there. So what is the purpose that Solomon will bring us through such a long, depressive number of sentences of observation? Turn to your neighbor and ask the same question. What do you think? What do you think? Why did Solomon bring us through all this? Interactive sermon. As I draw to a close, verse 24 to 26 gives us the clue. And he says, there is nothing better for a person that he will eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. What? He doesn't stop there. He says, this also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him who can eat or who can have enjoyment. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering, collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. There's an alternative being. So he moved from despair to joy. He says this is the alternative. The better life that he's talking about, this is why he's been searching all this while. The better life means good life also. There's a dual meaning. It's not just better, it's also good. This is a good life. And in this chapter, in the closing verses, he used better, enjoyment, and pleases twice. 4 words that he uses. Finally, something positive. And he's saying the only way to view all these things, pleasures in life, the good pleasures, that's why he says it's better, it's good. He's not saying all the morally wrong ones are viewed that is given by God. He's saying the good ones, the better ones, the one that is of wisdom, the one that is morally right with holy God. These ones that God has given, find contentment and gratefulness in them. That's what he's saying. 1 Timothy chapter 6, he says, God, and tells us that God is the one who gives us richly all things to enjoy. So the better life, the good life, is a life that everything, every pleasure is orientated through the lenses of God. So that all this illusion that I toil, therefore I deserve this, is dispelled, and you see that it's a blessing from God. Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22, was once at a party at Hamptons, and a guy came over to him and pointed a young 25-year-old standing at a party who worked for a big hedge fund. Heller's friend said to him, you see the guy over there? He made more money last year than you will ever make if all your books combined. To which Joseph Heller replied, maybe so, but I have one thing that the man will never have. His friend was skeptical and asked, oh yeah, what? Heller replied, enough. I have enough. Because Christ is enough. You and I have something that the author does not have. You and I have something that is not grubs after vapor. You and I have something that is tangible, and his name is called Jesus Christ. You and I look at death, and Solomon look at death and say, it's vexing even with my wisdom and my riches. You and I look at death and say, nope. We have the riches that is enough in Jesus Christ. Everything that is apart from Christ amounts to nothing. Everything in Christ is enough. Again, quoting from the author Ian Provan, he says, when the illusion that there is a profit to be made is discarded, and our limitations before the Creator God have been embraced, limitations of our lifespan, our possessions, our wealth, and so on. The biblical life is one that is designed to be lived in humility and obedience before God, accepting the limitations that are placed on us as mortal beings, finding joy and satisfaction in the ordinary things of life, including intellectual inquiry. So what's our application as we draw to a close? One is seeing joy through God's lenses. This story about two men who were neighbors, Tom and John, and they were painting, and John, they've been friends for many years, and they started painting, and one day they painted and they compared their painting, and John was looking at one side and said, wow, John was looking at Tom's painting and said, wow, Tom's painting is all about the greenery, the mountains. And then Tom looked at John's painting and says, John, your painting is about the bustling life of the city. And they realize that their both paintings are accurate, but as they change perspective, they have a broader and more incredible view, more colorful view of their perspective of things in the place that they stayed. We need that. We need to shift our perspective from the pleasures that won't last to look at pleasuring the one, finding joy in the one that lasts, to find our pleasure, our delight in God, the one that defeated sin and death that Solomon couldn't get over. Change your perspective. If you have been looking at all the things that you don't have, if you've been looking at all the things that don't last, why not look at the things that God has blessed you with? Don't, because of the things that you wallow in self-pity, you miss out on the things that God has blessed you with. I love what Brother Rick said in our men's ministry, and I'm going to paraphrase. He said this, all of Scripture is God-breathed. And he went on to say that, God's words is practical for every part of my life. The only time it's impractical is when he's not seeing it from God's perspective. He doesn't agree with God. He resists the things of God. We can see how God's words and his word come together and the beauty of it when we have the right perspective. But it's not only that, it's also speaking joy through God's leading. Your words can bring life to the people around you and to yourself. It's not mind over matter. It's speaking truth to yourself. That's different. It's speaking God's truth to one another. Start by giving thanks. Giving thanks is not a small thing. I don't know why people in cell group, that's time of giving thanks. 5 minutes of silence. It's like, is there nothing to give thanks for? Is there nothing in God's graciousness, blessing that we cannot even be so excited to tell? And it's like, we should all be like, let's give thanks. I can't wait. The reason why you're waiting is because you have not looked back at your whole life and reflected upon God's graciousness, goodness. You have stopped giving thanks to God. You only give complaints. And you miss out on what God is saying to you in your life. It's life-changing. Look at Nick Vujicic. He's an Australian-American Christian evangelist. He had no limbs. And he's once said at a conference, don't look at me with your eyes of pity. I've accomplished in my life with far more purposefulness than some of you your entire life have. And I do without limbs. He also says that life isn't about having, it's about being. You can surround yourself with all the money you can buy, you'll still be as miserable as a human being can be. I know people with perfect bodies who don't have half the happiness I found. On my journeys, I've seen more joy in the slums of Mumbai and the orphanages of Africa than in wealthy, gated communities that are on sprawling estates worth millions. The one thing that the author of Ecclesiastes is spot on. God is the ultimate control in life. I invite the worship team to come forward as we close. As I said earlier, time has caught up with me. I said earlier that Solomon doesn't have the view of Jesus that we have. He viewed it through God's lenses, but we do. We have one that says that he comes to give us life and life to the abundance. So as we rise, isn't it beautiful and fitting that we respond with this song, Turn Your Eyes Onto Jesus. Let's rise and let's close with this song. And even as you sing this song,